Hi, and welcome to this session on Is This Unconscious Program Ruining Your Life? I'm Lily Craig, and I'll be your guide through this particular session. I first want to start with a little bit of a story so that you can understand how this unconscious program worked for me in my life. Well, how it didn't work so well for me in my life. So, back many years ago, before I learned NLP, I used to have this argument with my husband every night. And it went something like this. How was your day? I mean, it seems like such an innocent question. How was your day? And yet, my husband and I seem to always end up in an argument after one or both of us said this particular question. So the problem is that every time I asked my husband, how was your day? He would respond, fine, or okay, or and he would not give me anything more than that. And it used to drive me absolutely nuts. How was your day? Fine. Well, did something interesting happen today? No. So every time I asked him a question about his day, it was always this one-word kind of answer, or very minimalist answer. And so I would ask him more questions, like, did something happen that was that caused you to get upset, or were you working on a project today, or did you follow up with that thing that you were working on before? And I would ask him all these questions, and he would get really irritated with me and saying, I don't come home to get, questioned like from the police from my wife. And so he got really upset at me every time I tried to find out more information about his day. Now, on the other hand, when my husband asked me about my day, I was very happy to tell him about my day. In fact, I normally started at the very beginning of my day and told him everything that happened. Well, I got up this morning and I did my meditations, and after my meditations, then I did my workout, and, this little, that thing that was, bothering in my foot, it came back. Well, and then I got a text message from Cindy, and then I would keep going on and tell him every detail about everything that happened in my day. Now, at about maybe 3 or 4 minutes into me talking about my day, my husband's eyes would sort of roll in the back of his head. And it was like he was saying to me, oh my God, why did I even ask her about her day? And then I would interpret the eyes rolling back in his head as something negative, and we would get into a fight. So each and every time we had this conversation about how was your day, we'd end up in a fight. Now, as you can imagine, this happened pretty much every Monday through Friday. And on the weekends, we didn't really ask the question because we were together. But it didn't stop, really, in our life, this constant argumentation about this particular question, until I learned NLP. So this is what I want to talk to you about tonight. First, we're going to talk about why it's important to learn about this stuff called chunk size and what metaprograms are. And we're going to learn not only the what, but how we are going to use this concept in our life and how we can prevent this unconscious programming from occurring in our lives and sort of taking over our lives. And then I challenge you to take a look at what you noticed and what you heard in this program that might have resonated with you in a certain way, and really feel kind of that feeling of change that could come about if you did something with the lessons that you learn in this particular session. All right, let's get started. As I said, I used this particular NLP concept of chunk size to save my marriage. Now, you could also use it to get the right job, or to hire somebody into the right job, or maybe even to stop family feuds within your own household, or improve your communication. There are so many different ways to be able to use this particular technique in NLP. So let's take a look at what exactly we're talking about. We want to look at this concept called meta-programs. Meta-programs are basically programs that run other programs. So their meta means above or beyond. And so they're sort of the higher level unconscious programming that we have had develop in our mind all through life. So maybe you've heard me say this before, or maybe this is new to you, but we have billions of chunks of information going on around us at any given time. And our brain only has the capacity to bring in a couple 100,000 or even less into our actual brain itself. So what it does is actually filter the information by deleting, distorting, or generalizing the information. And the way each of us specifically deletes and distorts and generalizes information is what is the basis of our programming. So as you can understand, when we're going through life, we create our reality of what we believe life is based on how we filter this information, how we distort and delete and generalize the experience or the information of the experiences going around us at any given time. So each of us is quite unique in our programming. So these meta programs are ones that are sort of governing a lot of other different kinds of things that we do. And it's the way our conscious, our unconscious, and our conscious brain sorts information. So it's really important to know how your brain sorts information. And one of the ways that it can sort information is by this thing that we call chunk size or scope. Chunk size is basically how a person prefers information to be delivered to them or what they use in conversation. Now, with all meta programs, we believe that all of them exist on a continuum. So basically, you can be anywhere on the continuum. You can be high, big chunk information, or high, small chunk information, or anywhere in between. And the basis of this continuum also is the fact that we recognize in NLP that you may have a tendency to be very big chunk associated on one area of your life and maybe small chunk associated in another area of your life. So it's context dependent as well. But sometimes there is one kind of programming that you have in one particular context that's causing problems. Like, for example, my husband and I having the conversation about how was your day. So, as you could probably understand from the description of my story about my husband and I earlier, my husband was sort of more a big chunk person. And what this means is that a big chunk person likes to have information that is more general, that is more broader, that is bigger scope than a small chunk person. So a big chunk person would normally say things like, essentially, or the big picture, or the important thing is, or in general. So they're going to be utilizing words like these. And big chunk people also would only be able to handle small details in small amounts. So you need to be careful of when you're presenting information to anybody who is a big chunk person if you happen to be detailed yourself, because details will overwhelm them. Another thing about people who are more big chunk associated is that they are somebody who would often give information in random order, whereas a small chunk person or somebody who likes detail has a tendency to give information in sequential order. So like me, when I was giving the information to my husband about my day, I would start at the beginning of the day and continue on and go through the end of the day. So it's very common for a characteristic for somebody who is more small chunk or detail oriented. So a person who is more small chunk oriented is a person who is going to use words like precisely or in detail or specifically or exactly. So they're going to use more words that reference to things that are sort of more pinpointed. And the other thing about a small chunk person is they might not be able to see a big, larger picture in what they're doing. So they might be able to very easily create small details, but not go into the big chunk area. Another thing to note about small chunk people is that if you interrupt them during conversation, they're most likely going to continue to repeat themselves and potentially start over at the very beginning of the sequence. So if you're dealing with a small chunk person and you are a big chunk, it's best not to interrupt them. So here's another story of how this kind of concept of scope size or chunk size comes about in everyday life. I had a client who worked in a marketing position, and she was presenting a marketing report to her boss. She had spent weeks on this particular report, and she was so excited to present it to her boss. It was chock full of every single detail of everything that she was going to do in the entire marketing department for the entire year. What do you think happened when she presented it to her boss? Her boss took one look at it, skimmed through the pages, handed it back to her, and said, "Redo it." Now, she was so angry when she came and spoke to me about it. She was just furious. All of this work that she did, and he didn't look at it at all. He barely even skim-read at it. There was nothing, no engagement in it whatsoever. So her question to me, of course, was, how could he know that it wasn't any good if he never read it? So what I asked her to do was to create little side pieces, sort of little boxes on the side of each page of the report, 2 maximum for each page of the report. And in that, to put a synopsis, a 140-character tweet, if you would, of what was important on that page. And I told her not to change anything about the documentation other than that box. So she redid the entire report, putting in those boxes, recapitulating sort of all of the main ideas from each of those pages, handed the report back to her boss. Her boss read every single one of those small little chunks, and he said the report was excellent. Now, there was nothing wrong with the information that she had. What was the problem is how she was delivering information to somebody who had a different set of programming than she did. So do you see how, like with my husband and I, or with my client and her boss, you see how if you have different programming for different people, it can create a lot of problems. And if you just know, like you know now, the programming, you can change the way you deliver information so that the other person has the ability to take the information in that you want to deliver. Another thing that you might want to recognize at this point in time is that I've been using this concept of big chunk and small chunk within my presentation. So at the beginning, I gave you a story, and it had a couple of details in it. So if you weren't really a detail kind of person, you might have gotten a little bit bored in the story, but I tried to keep it small and short. Normally when I tell that story, it goes on forever. And then the next thing I did was give you an overall big picture of what this session was all going to be about. And then as I continue to go along through the session, I keep getting more detail oriented to tell you more things about this information. Now, hopefully, even if you are a general or a big picture kind of person, you're still here listening to the presentation. And if you're detail, I'm sure you want to know even more. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you some examples of how somebody could be very general and very specific, and what it would sound like is as they moved closer and closer and closer together in the continuum. And I'm using the same exact example in all of these phrases. So let's look at what this particular thing sounds like. So starting with the specific. Somebody might say, well, yesterday at 10 a.m., George and I met with Mr. Vivendi, our big client from Rome. And well, we spoke about him renewing his contract, and he's doing it for the third year in a row. So he now wants to have the price of the cardboard packaging to be included in the total price for next year. Now, let's hear the same information, but somebody who's very big picture, on the opposite end of the spectrum or the continuum. So somebody who's very general might say, Rome wants to renegotiate. It's that simple. That's what somebody would say. Now, from a detail-oriented sort of perspective, I, of course, want to know more. And it's sort of only natural for somebody who's detail-oriented to go, well, okay, can you tell me some more about that? But for somebody who's big picture, Rome wants to renegotiate is perfectly acceptable information. All right, so let's look as we step one step closer to sort of the middle of the continuum. So somebody who's mainly specific might say of the same incident, well, yesterday at 10 a.m., George and I met with Mr. Vivendi and our client from Rome, and in reviewing our shipping contract for next year, he wants to include the cardboard packaging. End of story, right? So that is mainly specific. So what about mainly general? Mainly generals might sound something like, next year, Mr. Vivendi wants to renegotiate our contract. So that's more general, less details. What about something right in the middle? Well, it would sound something like, yesterday Mr. Vivendi told George and I he wants to include the cardboard packaging in the price for next year. So it gives just enough details, but in a wide enough picture that allows everybody to be, satisfied. Now, here's the thing. If you're more big picture, the idea is to work towards the continuum, more towards the middle. And if you're more specific, it is also your challenge to work more towards general, more towards the middle, especially when you're dealing with people who are opposite in their programming to you. So when I teach this in the NLP Practitioner Certification course, we talk about this as the hierarchy of ideas. So as you can see, if you start with something just normal, like a car, you can chunk it up into general, or you can chunk it down into specifics. So when we chunk up from an NLP perspective, we want to know what's important about the car. What makes it special? What does it mean to the person to have the car in the first place? So in this particular example, having the car, it means, or is the important part of it, is being able to have transportation. And if we ask again, so what's important about having transportation, or well, what does that mean to you? It's the ability to go where the person wants to go. And if we ask again, then the importance might be having the freedom to go where they want to go when they want to go there. So that gets us into a more big picture kind of thing. And you can hear it as we ask the question. Now, going down and chunking down, we want to ask a different set of questions. We want to ask, well, what kind, or what specifically, or how specifically? So when we're chunking down from car, we are asking, well, what kind of car? And if somebody says, well, it's a Toyota, well, what kind of Toyota is it? Oh, it's an SUV. Oh, okay. And so what specific kind of SUV is it? Well, it has automatic steering and air conditioning and a stereo system and white wall tires or whatever it is, right? So those are the specifics. So the ability for us to go up and to go down using these questions is really important. So the exercise that I have for you is located below, and you can download it so that you can do the exercise. Now, I've given you a couple of words, but you can use any words that you like. Follow along with the words that you have, or just create your own. The idea is to be able to chunk up by asking the questions, well, what's important about that? Or what does that mean to me? Or what does that get me? And when we chunk down, asking, well, what kind is that? Or how specifically? Or what specifically? When we do those kinds of questions to chunk down. So this is your how exercise for us, for you to play with this idea of hierarchy of ideas. Now, enough of the specifics. I want to look more big picture now. And the big picture is in NLP, we look at this in a way of how we look at NLP. So in NLP, we use an idea of being in trance or having information that's more general and less specific. And we use Milton model in NLP for that particular area that we concentrate on. Whereas if we're more specific, we're using the meta model. And so we also look at the fact that obviously big picture for up in our big chunk and detail with our small chunk. We also know that the structure of micromanagement in when somebody's micromanaging people at an office place is due to this idea of details, whereas flaky thinking or the idea of being too general for an organization to be able to meet its goals is often a problem in areas where the vision of a leader can't be brought down to practicalities of day-to-day management. All right, so that kind of gives you a big picture of where it fits overall in NLP. Now, one other story that I wanted to share with you is how another colleague of mine in NLP used this in a business setting. So she had a job of going in to solve a problem in a foreign market when they were trying to get this particular area to take on a new way or new structure of sales and accounting for sales, as well as how they manage their inventory. So she went into this situation, and what the people on the ground were basically telling her was that they couldn't use the new system. It just wasn't going to work. And so she had to use her NLP skills of chunking down to be able to find out what specifically it was that wasn't working within the system. So the people who were on the ground gave her this big picture. It doesn't work. And what she had to do was dive down and chunk down into details. So the more she asked questions about what specifically didn't work, the more she found out that the system itself was perfectly fine. The way that the salespeople actually sold, though, there was a question of whether it was going to work with the new system. So instead of asking the question, will this work? They just assumed that it wouldn't work and just said, it's not going to work. So this is how sometimes in corporations, we often lose a lot of productivity because of the fact that the people either in management or the people in the field don't know how to chunk themselves down or don't know how to chunk others down. And as well as understanding how to look at what we're doing in an overall big picture and not get overwhelmed by so many details that we become a perfectionist. All right, it's your turn now. There is the exercises below for you to go ahead and practice your big chunk and small chunk information. So you have the ability to go through and with these two examples, and again, you can choose different words on your examples if you wish, and go through and understand how it might be more interesting for you to chunk up than to chunk down. It might be easier for you to chunk down than to chunk up. Or you might be somebody that's in between. Now, it's an interesting set of statistics. When they did this analysis worldwide, it's about 60% of the population that is general, and only 15% of the population that is detailed. So that leaves the middle being those who can do both. But the overwhelming majority is big picture. So if you need to hire somebody who is detail-oriented, for example, if you wanted to get on an airplane and your airplane pilot was big picture, he could just look around the plane and say, yep, everything looks okay, let's go. Now, the important part is that we want somebody who's detail-oriented in the cockpit of our airplane. We want him to go through, or her, to go through the checklist. We want them to be able to know all of the details of how to operate the plane in all circumstances. So there are specific jobs that really work well for people who are detail versus big picture. I used to work as an inspector for hotels, giving hotels a star rating. And so for that position, you have to be incredibly detail-oriented. Then have the ability to give the entire report of the details that you found in a big picture to the person who runs the hotel in the first place. So, as you can probably see, there are a lot of ways that you can get into the right job or into the right relationship or the right whatever with the right programming. And as we know, it's always best to have the flexibility to go as much through the continuum as we possibly can. So you have now got the tools to allow yourself to take control of this unconscious program so that it can benefit your life. We'll see you in the next session.